So hi everyone, welcome to our World Down Syndrome Day webinar. We are the team from the Cambridge Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Group. I'm Stephanie Brown, I'm a research associate, and we are part of the University of Cambridge, and our research takes place in collaboration with the NHS. We also work with universities and research groups from across the world, and we're very excited to speak to you today about what we do and why we do it. So we'll start with some talks from our team, and then we'll have a special Q&A with some participants who've kindly volunteered to answer your questions, and the research team will also be happy to answer any questions you may have as well. So as we go along, please feel free to type into the chat, and then at the panel at the end, we can answer your questions. So what does our research hope to achieve? You may know that many people with Down syndrome develop memory problems as they get older. We're currently running several different research projects, which we'll tell you about today. But overall, our projects aim to learn more about the processes of early aging in Down syndrome, identify risks for dementia, which can be modified by lifestyle, identify how we can better treat dementia and early aging, and improve diagnoses with something that we call biological markers. And overall, our research is working to bring new treatments into the clinic as quickly and effectively as possible. And we very much care about inclusion in our research projects, and our new initiatives aim to improve inclusivity and diversity in our research. With a broader range of participants, we can make our findings more applicable and relevant to all people with Down syndrome, and we believe that everyone has the right to be involved with and represented in medical research. So what are the barriers to taking part in research? We asked a number of families and paid caregivers in a survey what might cause concern about taking part in a study. And what we found was that 72% of family caregivers and 70% of paid caregivers support individuals with Down syndrome taking part in research. Blood tests, brain scans, and cognitive tests were rated as relatively low levels of concern for most carers. And this is really good because this is the kind of approach we take for most of our research. But everyone is different. So for some, travel and the demands of taking part in a study are also concerning. If you're not sure about taking part in one of our larger studies, which involve brain scans and study visits, please feel free to start small and get to know our research team, because we're very happy to answer your questions. So how can we make participating in research more inclusive and listen to what you want from research studies? Well, one of the first things we do is face-to-face meetings. So before you take part in a study, we'll meet with the caregiver and the participant and give you lots of time to ask questions and time for decision making. We maintain and develop relationships with the Down Syndrome Association and other Down syndrome charities, and we utilise family connections as well. And once you've been a participant in our studies, we also offer you the chance to take part in future studies going forward. We use feedback as well from our studies, so we listen to the pros and cons from participant experiences, and we try and address that moving forward. There's also the opportunity to have a pre-scan visit. So if you're anxious about taking part in research because of a brain scan, we can invite you to familiarise yourself with the environment and what it's like to have a brain scan. We also work with accessible information so that the purpose of the study and what happens during the study is made clear to you. We also love to engage with families via our newsletters. So you might know that we send a quarterly newsletter to our participants and people interested in taking part in our research projects. And we're currently looking for people with Down syndrome to help us design the newsletters and tell us what's important to you to hear about. So if you're interested in working with us on our newsletter team, please do contact Valerie, and all contact details will be made available after the webinar. Finally, you might be interested in helping our research in a really fun, accessible and easy way. So we're starting a new project looking at how mobile gaming might be able to tell us about memory and aging. So Sea Hero Quest is a mobile app game developed by Alzheimer'S Research UK, which has already been played by over 4.3 million people worldwide in support of dementia research. The game is fun, it's really easy to use, and it helps researchers understand how people use spatial navigation. So I'll share this trailer with you now.
There was once a boy who lived by the sea. His father was a brave explorer. And when the boy turned 10, he took him on his first adventure. In faraway seas, they found incredible creatures and captured them, not with a hook, but with a pen. They voyaged together until his father grew old. And then, one by one, his memories were lost. Washed away by time and tide. The boy was now a man, and it was his turn to captain the ship. So he steered through the storms to find their old friends and bring them back to his beloved sea hero. Just like the boy who saved his father's memories, now you can save the memories of the future. Play Sea Hero Quest, the world's first mobile game where anyone can help scientists fight dementia. Share your time and game for good.
So if you are interested in joining us by playing Sea Hero Quest, you can contact me, Stephanie, by email, and all contact details mentioned in this presentation will be made available to you, along with a helpful resource box full of useful information by email afterwards. So please do take a look at that. So now we'll hear more from our team about our other projects, and I'll introduce Dr. Shahid Zaman, who will speak about brain health and introduce our new Abcds research.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that. So first, I'll just give you an outline of what type of research we do. You've heard some of the things we do from Stephanie, and why it's important, and what are the benefits, and how we're going to, what we're going to do, and how quickly we're going to see the benefits, because that's obviously the important thing for this type of program. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Firstly, I'll just tell you a bit of background about what the brain actually does. The brain, I'm sure you know, does a lot of things, including thinking, our ability to think, to imagine things, to remember and concentrate, to be able to speak and understand other people, in other words, language functioning, and to be able to plan and look forward to things, and all our senses, being able to see, hear, smell, touch, even emotions, feeling happiness, sadness, pain, excitement, and control of our body, of course, movement of our body. Next slide, please. But how does it all do all this? And it's a very complicated thing, as you can imagine. The brain is made of millions of tiny cells, which are all connected to each other and which communicate with each other or talk to each other. And these cells are called neurons. They predominantly work through communicating using tiny amounts of electricity somehow like you can imagine it like sending electricity down a wire, although it's not exactly like that. Sorry, I meant to speak a bit louder, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was saying that I'm talking about this, how the brain works. There are millions and millions of neurons, which are cells, which communicate with each other through tiny bits of electricity. And that becomes a very complicated problem. And you can try and work out, and you might be able to imagine how these actually work in terms of making us do all the functions that I mentioned earlier, such as thinking, concentrating, and movement, and all the rest of it. But of course, the thing is, these things can go wrong, and when they go wrong, that's when we might experience something like problems with memory as we get older. And one could think of it as perhaps a little bit like going into retirement, because it's a well-known phenomenon that as people get older, their brain seems to slow down for some reason. And that's partly our research to try and find out what causes all these problems. Next slide, please. So one way to take this forward is to try and obviously work out how the brain actually works. And there are many ways of doing this. And one of the ways is to measure this chattering between neurons by using small electrodes, which are like tiny microphones, which are placed on the head, as you can see in the picture on the right. And this tells us how the brains are actually talking to each other in terms of the electrical signals that they pass between each of the cells, each of the groups of cells. So that's one way. Another way is to look at what are called brain scans, and one of them is called MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging, and another one is called PET scan. And if you see a picture on the right, this shows a picture of both MRI and a PET scan superimposed on top of each other. And what does that tell you? Well, that tells you what the anatomy of the brain looks like, the shape and the features, the morphological features. And it can also tell you something very important, such as what kind of sort of chemicals are in there. And the red bits that you see in the brain there in the picture indicates a protein called amyloid, which occurs in people who start getting memory problems. So I'm hearing chats that people are still struggling to hear me. I don't know what the issue is. Maybe I'll speak in louder. Sorry about that. So another way to find out what, is that better? Yes. Another way to find out what measuring brain function is to ask people to do quizzes and tests, which actually essentially test the memory and the concentration and even language. And this is all part of the research that we do. So firstly, we ask people if they want these electrodes on their head, the EEG, to see what the electrical activity of the brain is. We ask them to have scans done, which can tell us about the anatomy or if there are any abnormal proteins in the brain. And finally, to do the quizzes to see how well the brain is functioning in terms of their concentration and memory. Next slide, please. So the reason we focus on a certain age group in people with Downs, we know that around the age of 40 and 50, people tend to start the brain starts thinking a bit more slowly than normal. And that can cause problems with, as I said, attention, thinking, and memory. And what we're trying to do is find out exactly why is that happening, because it's not a normal process. It's to do with what we think is to do with these proteins called amyloid is one of them, which I showed you a picture of earlier. And another one, which we're also able to picture by doing PET scans, is a protein called tau. And we think that these two are probably the major players in why people, in the general population, as well as people with Downs, who start getting problems with memory, start having this problem because of deposition of these in the brain, abnormal depositions. And our task is to try and find out why that happens, how it happens, and how we can prevent it and find treatments for it. Next slide, please. But even before all that, we know something already how to, and which is how to keep the brain healthy. We know that people who have lots of friends and socialize a lot and engage in social activities such as going to parties, having lots of fun, exercising, running or walking. Exercise certainly helps both your heart and your brain, and is well known. And of course, eating healthy food, being happy, your mood is very important. If you're not feeling happy or anxious, it's important to get help for that. So being stressed or worried can affect your brain function as well. And this whole general physical health is also important. And all doctors recommend that we should see doctors regularly for a checkup once every year, especially as you get into that age group. But also getting help as quickly as possible if you're feeling unwell. This is also important because early treatment can help prevent any future problems, not just for physically, but also for your brain as well. Next slide, please. So what happens when things start going wrong? Well, as I said, if your brain starts slowing down, if you're noticing problems, maybe your mood changes, and what you need to do is obviously try and check, ask a doctor, a GP, whoever. But there are other reasons for that slowing down, and one of them is if you may have some pain somewhere, or it may be that perhaps your ears are blocked because you've got too much wax. And a common problem everyone I'm sure knows is a thyroid. If you have low thyroid in your body, thyroid is a hormone, thyroxine is a hormone that's released by the thyroid gland in the neck. And what happens is that if you're not producing enough of it, it can cause your brain to think more slowly. And there are other symptoms as well, but it's easy to treat. You can have some treatment with thyroxine tablets, and that can solve the problem. So it's really important to get, if you feel that there's changes going on, you must try and get some help to work out what the reason for that is. And it may not be just to do with the amyloid or the tau or the other possible reasons we think are important. Next slide, please. So in order to try and work out why people get these problems and how we can address them in terms of trying to find treatments, what we first need to do is really work out the details of when it happens, how it happens, and what are the links between the depositions of this amyloid and tau, and even look for other things in the blood that will tell us perhaps some chemicals or other biochemical factors, which we call biomarkers, which might help us to understand what the process is that is going on. So what we, in our big sort of project that we have, which is called the Abcds, which is an international project led by the United States of America. And we're one of the partners in many labs that are involved. And our task is to recruit up to about 60 to 80 people and have them ask them to be scanned and have blood tests taken in 4 visits over about 4 years. So in visit 1, they would be asked to do quizzes and puzzles to check their memory and concentration and their mood, and to see if they've got any other health problems that might explain any changes they may be experiencing. Have a blood test and have a scan, and the scan would tell us whether they've got any changes in the brain, anatomical ones or other ones that we don't know about, but we're just trying to discover. And that same person who may have no problems at the beginning would be followed up in time over visit 2, 3, and 4 with a similar sort of tests, which again, if the person starts experiencing symptoms, then we'll find out what might be going on in the brain at the same time to help us explain how we can work out what the issues are. And from this, we hope to be able to work out how we can go to the next stage, which is have treatments. And if we say, for example, find out that it's predominantly amyloid that's causing the problems, we do have medications that might work in this population. the aim being to prevent, obviously, the problems that might that happen with age. Next slide, please. So far, we've done another study which is related to the Abcds, and we've so far scanned about 54 people, and we're very thankful to them. And all the information we've gathered so far is helping us to go to the next stage, but we still need a bit more information and more people to be scanned before we can really go in depth into a clinical trial. But I think the important thing to remember is that we made a huge amount of progress, and you've already heard me talk about the main contenders that might be causing the issues, which is amyloid and tau. But there are probably multiple other factors we really need to understand, because it's a very complicated problem. So the age that we're looking for is anybody over the age of 25 for this study, preferably who don't have any major problems. But even if they have problems, we're happy to look at them and see if they could join our study. But I think this is really important, because we're very close to, possibly in a year or two, we'll be proposing a new a sort of clinical trial, and I think you'll hear about that a bit later as well. I think that's my last slide. Next, no. So I'll introduce you to now Jessica, who works in the team, and she leads on the another project, which is again related to this Abcds project, which is to do with investigating the retina. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Shahid. Hi, everyone. Yep, as Shahid said, my name's Jess. I'm a research assistant working in the group, and in the next couple of slides, I'm going to explain a little bit about what our research is when we look at people's eyes. So we found that by looking at your eyes, we can get a pretty good idea about what's occurring in your brain. And this is because the retina, which is the section at the very back of your eye, this is directly connected to your brain and can act as an almost window into the brain. And so we've done some initial research looking at people's eyes, and we've seen that people who have amyloid blobs in their brains, their retina tends to be a lot thinner when compared to those who don't have amyloid blobs in their brains. But because we only have a relatively small amount of data on people's eyes and also brain scans, we'd like to follow these findings up in a further study that will look at your retina in more detail and over a longer period of time. And so in the next slide, I can go over a little bit about what this study will look like and how exactly we can look at people's eyes. So for this upcoming study, we'll be working with the Vision and Eye Research Institute at Anglia Ruskin. And as I mentioned, your retina is at the very back of your eye, so we need special cameras that are able to look specifically at your retina. And so these cameras will take 3D photographs of your eye, which means that we can have a look at what's going on under the surface of your eye without actually having to touch your eye in any way. And having these photographs is a lot like when you go to the opticians and you get your eyes tested to see whether you need new glasses or not. So nothing will touch your eye, we're just taking very high definition photographs. And then the photographs we get are like the ones that we can see here at the bottom. And we can see in the kind of greeny black figure at the bottom, we can see a slice of your retina. And this shows all the different layers. And so for our study, we're particularly interested in measuring the thickness of these different layers. And we hope that by doing this, we can then learn more about how people's eyes change as they get older, and then why some people might get memory problems as they age. And so this is kind of a very broad overview of the eye study and how we can image your eyes. If you want to know any more information, you can contact me afterwards. But in the next couple of slides, I will talk about a project called the Horizon 21 study, and Valerie heads this up. So I will just go on to the next slide if that's okay. Yep, so the Horizon 21 project, as I said, it's headed up by Valerie. You can see her in the top here. As part of this project, we work with other research groups across the UK and also in Europe. And so we're currently working with groups in places like Ireland, France. We've got a couple of people in Spain, Sweden, Norway, Germany, and also the Netherlands. And this project is focused on looking at whether particular quizzes and puzzles, as well as blood and genetic tests, may be able to detect whether memory problems are starting in people with Down syndrome. And there should be a nice video here, and we can show this and can tell you a bit more about the project.
We have something important to tell you.
Investigadores de toda Europa están trabajando juntos.
They want to find out more about dementia in people with Down syndrome.
Ce groupe s'appelle Horizon 21 pour travailler sur la trisomie 21.
Viele Menschen in ganz Europa sollen das gleiche Werkzeug benutzen, um die Menschen dann zu erkennen. Dafür arbeitet die Gruppe zusammen.
Dette betyr at vi kan sammenligne informasjon fra forskjellige land i Europa.
Dit zal mij helpen de missie beter te begrijpen.
The consortium will find out what changes happen in the blood because of Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome.
Hvilke endringer skjer i hjernen.
Waarom onze geenspatronen zijn bij de ziekte van Alzheimer.
This is really important to help us find out more about what causes dementia.
We need to include lots of people with Down syndrome.
Es muy importante que las personas con síndrome de Down sean incluidas en la investigación sobre la demencia.
En travaillant sur le groupe Horizon 21, nous travaillons ensemble pour en savoir plus sur la maladie d'Alzheimer.
This book will help us to find out how we might be able to stop dementia.
Mrs. Help makes a difference to me.
To me.
For my.
To me.
Para mí.
Pour moi.
To me.
For my.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little overview of the project. If you'd like to know more about this project, please reach out to Valerie and she can give you any further information that you may like. I now hand over to Shamaya. She will tell you more about how many people we currently have involved in our research projects.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Shamaya. I'm one of the research assistants who will be working on ABCDS, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the number of participants who've already been involved in our research. So as Shahid mentioned earlier, in our NIAD study, which is going to be has been similar to the ABCDS study that we're about to run and has been running for the last 5 years, we've seen about 45 people with Down syndrome and 9 sibling controls. And some of you listening have definitely taken part in this, and thank you so much to everyone who's already taken part. Now we're about to start our new ABCDS study. We'll be looking for more people to take part, both people with Down syndrome and their siblings. And we'll be looking to see around 65 people with Down syndrome in ABCDS. And so we'll be looking to recruit at least 20 more people than we've had for NIAD. So if you would like to take part, we'd love to hear from you. It doesn't matter if you've already taken part in NIAD, if you took part in some of our other studies before NIAD, or if you've never taken part in any of our research before. We'd love to hear from you if you think you might be interested in taking part or would like some more information about taking part. So now I'll pass over to Valerie, who'll tell you a bit more about our TrackDS study, which is looking at clinical.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Steph. And I'd just like to quickly reiterate that we'd like to give a very warm welcome to both people who haven't necessarily engaged with our group previously, as well as to those who have previously been part or currently are part of NIAD or any of our other studies. So regardless of whether, as Shamaya put it, you have or haven't been part of our research in the past, I think it's interesting to hear a bit about the trial-ready cohort for Down syndrome, also known as TrackDS. So TrackDS really builds upon the things that we learned from our prior work with our participants. So for those of you who have taken part in the NIAD study, it's been described as the next logical step to it. So what I mean by that is in the Naiad study, we learned a lot about what causes Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome. So we learned about these different markers that seem to be underlying the development of Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome, so namely amyloid and tau. Now, researchers with the Alzheimer's Clinical Trials Consortium for Down syndrome, or the ACTCDS, have used this knowledge from studies like Naiad to develop therapeutic drugs that do treat Alzheimer's disease in both people with Down syndrome and those without. So ultimately, the goal of TrackDS is kind of not only the next step of Naiad, so a practical application of what we learned from it, but also a project related to finding clinical trials, so therapeutic ways to treat Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome. Now, specifically what we're trying to achieve in this study itself is that we're just going to assemble a group of people with Down syndrome and measure the different relevant biomarkers that we learned from Naiad, so namely amyloid and tau, in each person to both ensure that they're ready for an anti-Alzheimer's disease clinical trial, and also just to ensure that the trial itself goes well and everything is as useful as it can be. So next slide, please. We're still currently working to get everything set up for the TrackDS project before we start actively recruiting people to come participate. But if you think down the line you'd be interested in participating in TrackDS and further down the line, the clinical trials that will be associated with it, I'd be really happy to hear from you, whether just to give a bit more information or to add your name to a list of people to contact first when we do start recruiting, whatever you'd like. So you can contact me at vw294@medschool.cam.ac.uk. And of course, as Stephanie said, she'll be sending out an info box with all of her contact information after the presentation. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Valerie. So now we'll share with you a video which is a lovely example of a day in the life of a research participant in one of our studies. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of what taking part in a research study looks like. And now I'll pass you over to Jess, who will introduce our panel. Our participants and ourselves will be very happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Steph. So yeah, hopefully that video gave you a better idea of what it's really like to participate in our research study. And a huge thank you to Tom as well for coming in and filming that with us. I think it looks really great. So we now have a panel of participants. I think we've got Olivia here, who I will just try and get up.
Hang on.
Do we have Olivia?
I'm coming on.
Hi, Olivia.
Hi.
Hi. We also have Jonathan as well, I believe.
Yes, we're here. We're here.
Brilliant. We can't see you, but
you're here and we're watching.
Okay, great. We can go with it. We can stick with the voice. Do we have Catherine here at all? I was trying to find you in the chat. If you're here, just raise your hand and then I'll try and get you to get your video on. But for now, we're kind of take questions from the floor. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask our current participants, so Olivia and Jonathan both involved in lots of our research studies, they can answer any questions that you might have about, you know, what are the good things, bad things, things like that. If you put it in the chat, I will then monitor that and read out and we can get some answers.
And we'll also keep an eye on the questions that have been asked throughout the thing, and we'll answer them after the discussions, or some may come up at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe if I go ahead with the first question to get things going. So maybe Olivia, if you answer first, why did you decide to take part in our research studies?
It is important that Down syndrome can have like a scan for their head, for the brain, and what's amyloid and tau is meant for other people to understand how other people are taking part of this project and stops getting dementia with other people can have it or may not have it. So we want to make sure that we do our best to do the games and activities and get like reflexes and reflexology, make sure we're okay, and getting the scans that we're supposed to do. And I think it's been really good for that team. And I just want to say thank you for making me feel very better and making me feel that I'm more confident to be part of this project. And obviously I have been with the project for a little while, so it has been really good to help to shape the future to things that I could even do, or making sure we are in a safe bubble, that everyone's there and helping.
And Jonathan, what kind of made you interested in participating in the research study with us?
It's about, but the research memory is still going on okay. And I just like the games and stuff, what me and you did.
Yeah. And what would you say the best part was taking?
The best part was the MRI and PET scans.
Okay. And then we have a question here about, do you have to be local to Cambridge? So I think both of you can answer that. Where do you come from? How far do you travel to get to Cambridge?
From Warrington.
So quite a way. And then Olivia, where do you?
Bristol.
Was it relatively easy to travel to Cambridge for the study?
I did.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And we've had obviously people from as far as Glasgow, haven't we, fly down, and we do cover the expenses, so that's not an issue, including accommodation if necessary.
Yeah, it's a brilliant experience.
Oh, thanks.
What kind of things did you maybe not like, or maybe were a little bit apprehensive about? Was there anything, or was it all good?
It was all good.
Yeah, Olivia, how about you?
I think for me, I'm going to hate and say it, is the PET scan and the scan, because I think there was a lot of clanging, a lot of banging, and I came out and a banging headache, and I knew it was coming to me. But it was important that other people with Down has to have it because it's part of the research.
Yeah. And did you get to listen to music when you were in the scan?
Yeah, I did. And I said, put the music on and ignored it, really.
Good. I'm not sure if we have any more questions. Would you, so Olivia, first of all, would you recommend that other people help out with the research study?
Yes, I would. I would let more people come in and take part, really, because it's about the whole study. It's about the learn. It's about getting the people with Downs like you as well. You're included, but I think lots of people around the world might want to get it, because it's taking part of the brain and how the brain works and how we get it into amyloid and tau. So it's kind of like finding things if there was problems in the brain or if there wasn't any. We want to double check that having a PET scan and getting games and activities, getting the canyon. I didn't like the canyon bit, I have to say, because it was slightly ongoing, but obviously I did have it.
How did you find the quizzes and puzzles? Were they fun? Were they tricky? How did you find those?
Fun.
Fun, good. How about you, Jonathan? How did you find the quizzes and puzzles?
Fantastic, thank you.
You did very well at them. Okay, so I think we may be at the end of the questions. So if we kind of open the floor to general questions to the research group and our participants, you can jump in.
Yeah, so quite a lot of those in chat.
Oh, okay. They're looking at the wrong thing. Can you see them, Valerie? Because I'm...
Yeah, shall I read them out loud?
Yeah, if you have, I'll just try and find them.
So Valerie, if you could perhaps, there are lots of things in the chat, maybe start off with the Q&A and we can perhaps go through them and everybody can contribute as necessary. From the beginning.
Yeah, so in terms of
questions there.
Q&A, sorry, I don't think there was a caption subtitles function. I believe Steph will be sending out a resource box with like the most important points from the presentation. Does Alzheimer's follow the same course in individuals who have Down syndrome? I think Shahid might be better placed to answer that, but generally it occurs a lot earlier and a lot more frequently. So a majority of people with Down syndrome are rather likely to get Alzheimer's disease in their 50s or even in their 60s, which isn't necessarily the case in the general population. But in terms of the progression, we've learned about accumulation of amyloid and tau. That does seem to be the same mechanism underlying. Okay, does Pacemaker and Mri? I know that's some.
Yes, so pacemakers are a contraindication for going to MRI, which has very strong magnets. So that's the main contraindication. But with the other studies that we mentioned, you can join them because you don't need an MRI scan for that. That's also a possibility.
How much information or results are shared with participants and their carers?
So what we do is if there's some kind of, say, clinical situation that arises that we pick up, we're happy to share the information, if we're given permission, with the GP or whoever wants the information. But it's usually the type of information that's going to be helpful clinically or has been established as clinically relevant. So what I mean by that is if we see an MRI scan which shows amyloid, PET scan which shows amyloid, that in itself is at the moment is not helpful clinically because we haven't really established how we can use it clinically to help the person. So we tend not to share that information because it's not going to be clinically helpful at this stage. I mean, in the future it may be. So that's what we do.
Elizabeth has a very interesting observation that I think a lot of people have observed in the past. She's noted that her sister, who has both dementia and epilepsy, she's asking if the epilepsy drugs affect the dementia because she's seeing an increase in alertness. So that definitely is the case. But Shahid, would you like to explain?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because the studies that have been done, we've discovered that if someone has a diagnosis of dementia, they're more likely to have, I think it's about 10% more likely to have epilepsy as well. But the way it's managed is essentially to treat the seizures. That's really important, I think. So in a way, it actually helps the dementia. So the answer is it's important to get it treated. And there's a link between the two.
Nikki asks, do all participants have to be over 25 years? So each of the studies have their own required age ranges. Some of them, for instance, Horizon 21, are happy to recruit people who are younger.
Yeah, so there's 25 is our cutoff for the ABCDS. So some of the studies, like Valerie says, are you can be younger. Yeah.
What information can you share so far from our research?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the stuff has been published in heavy-duty academic journals, and we try to convey some of that information in the newsletter. But I think if I could pick out a few important things, one thing we've learned is that a lot of things that happen in someone who, in the general population, who is, let's say, in their 60s or above, is those sort of things start to happen much earlier in someone who has Down syndrome, in their 40s. For example, we've discovered that amyloid starts accumulating in around about 35 to 45 and upwards, and which is the same situation in the general population too, around about the age of 65 and upwards. So that's one major thing we've discovered. So it seems everything that happens seems to happen a lot earlier, and that's probably true with other things too, such as change in memory as people get older, even in the general population. So those are one of the two things we found, and there's lots of other things we've discovered as well, but it'll take too long to go into details. But papers are being published on this matter.
So the last Q&A question is, what percentage of people with Down syndrome get Alzheimer's? So I briefly mentioned this earlier. My understanding is that it's as high as 70 to 80%, but Shahid?
Yeah, I think, so I would say I agree that the majority of people will eventually. The question is when. Sometimes it can occur, sometimes it can occur as early as 35, sometimes as late as 65. So it's a quite wide age range, but what mean might be somewhere in the age of about 55. Those are the figures that we have. That's when you first get diagnosed with dementia in people with Down syndrome. So average is about 55, but that's like 50% of people. So the longer you wait, the more likely you're to have the condition. Yeah. In many ways, it's very similar to the condition that's a lot is rarer. It's called familial autosomal dominant, or it's a genetic form of Alzheimer's disease, which occurs in certain families. So if you have one abnormal gene in the APP gene, for example, there's a 50% chance that your children will have that gene, and they will then inevitably get the diagnosis roughly the same age as you might have had the diagnosis as a parent. And it's, in many ways, it's similar to that condition.
So that was less of the Q&A questions, but there are a lot of questions in the chat. So shall we see how many of those we can get through?
Yeah, please.
So Bambina asks, will the sibling have to go through the same tests?
So yeah, I can probably speak to that. So we don't have as many quizzes and puzzles, but we do ask siblings to have 2 PET scans. So the scanning is the same and the blood draw is the same, but we have less quizzes and puzzles. So it's a slightly shorter visit, but we can try and arrange it so it coincides a bit with your sibling participating, and maybe a nice trip to Cambridge to make things a bit easier.
Try punting.
And we put people up in our very expensive hotel called Travel Lodge.
Very good.
Linda notes that ability is quite wide, and does cognitive ability affect results? I think definitely, but you guys probably have a better way of summarizing it.
Yeah, I think the key thing about cognitive, so we, in the general population, we use cognitive tests to see if someone has memory problems and maybe dementia. And the key thing with people with Downs is that what we've learned is it's important to look for change. So that means you have to have an assessment that was done several years ago. And if you use that assessment and repeat the assessment, and if you see a change, then it gives you more confidence that there's been a decline. And that's how we detect the decline.
So there are a few questions on age and location. So this has been brought up before, but just to summarize, across the different studies, there are lots of different ages we're looking for. And in terms of location, you can be based anywhere. We will be happy to pay travel and accommodation expenses. So as long as you're willing to travel, then you can be based anywhere really in the UK.
And to add to that, people, sometimes come to stay overnight for a couple of nights. And if sometimes they come a night earlier, so give them time to settle in. So we're happy to do that, because we believe this is worth paying for, because it's a very difficult thing to come over here, but I think the inconvenience and all that, we're happy to pay for that.
Annie asks, would congenital heart disease prevent her daughter from participating?
Not in itself, but if there's complications, then perhaps, then it might be, if the person's too breathless, or they we don't have any particular medications that and there are a few things that we exclude. So we'd have to look at the individual case, but in of itself, it's not a contraindication. So you can be considered for it, definitely.
There's a question about whether if you're at risk of a genetic condition, so in this case Huntington's, whether that would be an exclusion criterion.
We haven't really thought of that as, you mean in the siblings, or in the siblings, I assume, controls, yeah? Sibling, assuming, yeah. If that's the case, we haven't really thought about that, to be honest. My guess would be probably yes, because the reason for having sibling controls is that they would have everything but the trisomy, and not in addition, like a Huntington's gene issue.
Parvini asks if we could share more about the ethical approval process for the studies, like getting informed consent for vulnerable groups. So maybe talk about like the Mental Capacity Act and stuff.
Yeah, so we take that very seriously. We've been through quite rigorous ethics, which is a committee that looks at our proposal and makes sure that we're not doing anything that's unethical. And that includes asking for valid consent, so doing an assessment of mental capacity. And in cases when someone doesn't have the mental capacity, the guidance is that we're allowed to ask someone who knows the person really well and who would be willing to, as it were, give an opinion of what they might be thinking or what they would want to do. But at any time during the process of the protocol, the person can withdraw any time. There's no questions asked. It's not like you have, once you're committed, you have to complete everything. No, it's not like that. It's completely, you can leave any time you want to. Even in the middle of a scan, people have done that.
Carolyn asks, does having hypothyroidism increase risk of dementia if on medication?
Sorry, what? I missed that. What?
Does having hypothyroidism, since you mentioned that having like thyroid imbalance.
Okay, does it increase the risk? The studies, the hypothyroidism, it's not a risk factor as far as I know, but that's one of the research we want to do, is to find out if it does increase the risk. But there's nothing written about saying that hypothyroidism itself increases the risk of dementia. But certain other things do, such as if you have depression prior to eventually being diagnosed. Depression, certainly in the general population and even in people with Downs, has been shown to be a risk factor for dementia. And the reason I mentioned depression is because in hypothyroidism, it can present like someone has depression or a mood issue.
So these two kind of go together, but Julia has very kindly noted that she has been participating as a sibling control. So if any of you guys are interested in being a sibling control or would like to learn more about that, she's volunteered to be happy to speak to anyone who'd like to hear about her experience. And Bambina asks if the sibling for ABCDS has to be over 25 years old.
For ABCDS, yeah, everyone has to be over 25. And I think there's also just a quick question here to Olivia and Jonathan about when you travelled to Cambridge, did you get time to spend in Cambridge? Did you explore the city as well as doing our research projects? Olivia, maybe you answer first.
Yeah, I'll answer first. I stayed one of the travel lodges when I was down with my mum. We obviously did like punting on the open top bus before we did the hospital, but then the next day it was the hospital straight away, and we had to do all the puzzles and games and the reflex. I loved doing that because realised I know the man who's on the line is actually who did my reflex. So
you got time to spend in Cambridge, which is nice.
Yeah, it's really nice to have like people down helping me and getting to know them, like you and the reflex man. I think I enjoyed the reflex and the games together.
Yeah,
that kind of helped.
Brilliant. And Jonathan, did you get time to spend in Cambridge? Have you seen bits and pieces of Cambridge, the River Cam and things like that?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
We went down the Botanic
Gardens as well.
Yeah, lots of nice places to see, which we hope you can come and enjoy whilst also participating.
Wonderful breakfast at the travel lodge.
Oh, we had that as well.
Yeah,
to enjoy that as well, Wendy.
Brilliant. Do we have any more questions?
I think there's one last question from Nikki, who asks if there are any. So she says that there are some nutritional supplements that are advertised for people with Down syndrome. She asks if we're considering the subgroup, if we're aware of any research on this, because she says that she seems to think that opinions vary greatly. Will you be following a group that takes these supplements from when they're young onwards, I suppose, to try to validate if these supplements are actually worth anything?
Yes, so the question was about supplements, whether they're beneficial or not, and whether we're not doing any research on that. And there may be groups around the world doing that sort of research, but it wouldn't be, if you did decide to join our research group, participate, then it wouldn't be, I don't think it's a contraindication. But in terms of, we're not doing that sort of specifically that sort of thing. So there's some more research going on what the effects of lifestyle is on cognition, such as exercise, how much exercise you do, or how much education you've had. So there's that sort of thing, but supplements less so.
So Stephanie already answered this question, but I think it's really important. So just to make sure that everyone has seen it, Tom has asked that he's noted that there are several research projects going on. Are you asking people to sign up for one or for all of them? And Stephanie noted that it's totally up to the participant which studies, if anything, they'd like to take part in. And if that anyone enjoys their first study experience, they can choose if they'd like to sign up to any more.
Yeah, so I think some people do have been involved in more than one project, but it's completely voluntary. They may find that one project is a lot more suitable for their tastes than another one. And some people are very enthusiastic, and they've been involved in actually 2 or 3 projects. They become almost a resident for research.
Yeah, and just to follow up that as well, Tom asks, do all the studies require MRI or PET scans? No, they don't. Like the eye study doesn't involve that. Horizon 21 doesn't. Also the Sea Hero Quest, which you can do from home, which is a relatively nice way to get involved, see if you enjoy it, and then ask about further ones. So yeah, just get in touch if you would like to participate, and we can see what study is the best fit.
So there's one question, I think we did answer it partially, on do we look for other markers besides amyloid and tau? We do look for what's called FDG PET, which measures the amount of glucose uptake, which is an indirect measure of synaptic activity. So we do use that as well. But in terms of the MRI, there's lots of different things that can be looked at, such as the blood vessels, the state of the blood vessels, or the blood flow as well, in terms of how much the brain, different bits of brain are functioning. So there's several things that we do try and look at as well, in the hope that we can discover something that will help us to explain the syndrome, I mean the memory issues.
Brilliant. I think we are kind of drawing to a close. We've just gone over our hour